I was in a terrible mood, but I had to admit Asuna looked awesome in her white and red knight's uniform again. We had taken a break from the guild because of some pretty rough stuff that happened. And we didn't have to come back if we didn't want to. But then I thought about the message we got, and how it said people had already gotten hurt. That made me feel guilty. Asuna seemed to know what I was thinking. "Come on, let's go hear what they have to say," she said, giving my back a friendly pat. I stood up and checked my equipment screen. Since I wasn't officially part of the guild right now, I put on my old black leather coat, and some basic armor. I also grabbed my 2 swords and crossed them over my back. It felt weird wearing them again, like I was being punished for leaving them alone in my inventory for so long. The weight of the swords felt new and unfamiliar, but I knew I had to get used to it again. Asuna was right, it was time to face whatever was going on, and see what we could do to help. I pulled out my swords and slid them back into their scabbards. It was like giving them a little wake-up call. The sound echoed through our cozy room. "You look way cooler with your swords out," Asuna said with a grin, hopping up to grab my arm. I turned around to take one last look at our new home. "Let's get this done and come back already," I said quietly. Asuna nodded in agreement. We shared a determined nod, then opened the door and stepped outside into the chilly morning air. It was crisp and cold, with a hint of winter on the way. As we walked to the teleport gate on the 22nd floor, we ran into a familiar face, Nishida, with his trusty fishing rod by his side. We had told him we were leaving, but no one else knew our plans. "I wanted to talk to you guys," he said. So we sat down on a nearby bench, the 3 of us huddled together, ready to chat before we took off. Nishida looked up at the floor above us and started talking. "Honestly, I've kind of forgotten about everyone else who's trying to beat this game," he said. "They're fighting on the upper floors, but it feels like they're in a whole different world." We all just listened, not saying a word. Nishida kept going. "You know how fast technology changes. It's crazy. I've always loved tinkering with gadgets and figuring out how they work. But being stuck here for 2 years has really put me behind. The electronics business moves so fast. And I'm starting to feel like I've lost touch. I'd rather stay here and enjoy a great catch than go home and feel like a total waste of space," he said with a hint of a smile on his weathered face. I was stuck for words. How could I possibly understand what this guy had been through, trapped in the virtual world of Sword Art Online? Asuna spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "I felt the same way until about 6 months ago. Every night, I'd cry myself to sleep, feeling like my whole life was falling apart. My family, friends, school, everything seemed to be slipping away from me, bit by bit. I was totally losing my mind. Every time I fell asleep, I had crazy dreams that felt super real. All I could think about was getting better at this game so I could finally beat it. Then something caught me off guard. I turned to look at Asuna, and I was surprised by what she said. I wouldn't have guessed that about her when we first met. To be honest, I'm not always great at paying attention to people." Asuna glanced over at me with a smile. "One day, about 6 months ago, she started saying I teleported to the front lines to take on this tough new labyrinth. And guess what? I saw someone sleeping on the grass in the middle of the square. I was furious with this guy because he seemed really strong but wasn't doing anything to help. So I told him, if you're just gonna hang out and do nothing, why don't you lend us a hand and help us clear the labyrinth?" The girl next to me covered her mouth and started giggling. She said that the guy replied, "It's a beautiful day in Aincrad, the best time of year. It would be a waste to spend it stuck in a dungeon." Then he pointed to the grass and said, "Come on, take a break and relax." I mean, can you believe how rude that is? The girl giggled again, but then she looked out at the horizon, and her expression changed. She said that's when something clicked, and she snapped back to reality. I watched this guy just chillin' in the virtual world, and I thought to myself, he's not missing out on life. He's gaining a new kind of life. It was like he had found his own secret paradise. I had never seen anyone look at it that way before. So, I told my friends in the game to go ahead without me. And I lay down next to him in the grass. The next thing I knew, the warm breeze and comfy air made me feel super relaxed, and I fell fast asleep. It was amazing, no weird dreams or anything. It was probably the best sleep I'd had since I started playing this game. When I woke up, it was already evening. and my new friend was still sitting there with me, looking a bit frustrated. Asuna gave my hand a squeeze. "That was him," she said. But honestly, I was totally confused. The story sounded familiar, but something didn't add up. I didn't say anything out loud. But Asuna knew me well. She smiled and said, "Sorry, I don't think you meant to be so deep. You probably just wanted a nap." She laughed and teased me about it for a moment. Then she turned back to Nishida, who was watching us with a big smile on his face. Asuna started talking again. "After that day, something changed. Whenever I went to bed, I'd think about him. And you know what? My nightmares started to go away." Asuna's eyes sparkled as she kept talking. "I even figured out where he lived, and I'd visit him whenever I could. It was like having something to look forward to, and the best part, I started feeling happy about waking up each morning. It was a brand new beginning every day." Asuna's heart skipped a beat when she realized she had fallen in love with Kirito. She felt an overwhelming sense of happiness, and didn't want the feeling to fade away. For the first time in a long time, she was grateful to be alive. Asuna looked down, wiping her eyes with her white gloves, and took a deep breath. "Kirito is everything to me," she said. "He's the reason I've stayed in this virtual world for 2 years. He makes me feel like my life has meaning. And he gives me hope for a better tomorrow." Asuna had logged into the game using her Nerve Gear headset, searching for one-person Kirito. She turned to Mr. Nishida, and said, "I think you might have found something special here too. Even if it's not my place to say so." Imagine living in a world that's not really real, just a bunch of computer-generated stuff. But even if everything around us is fake, our feelings are totally genuine. That means all the amazing things we've been through, and learned here, are real too. Nishida's eyes lit up behind his glasses as he nodded like crazy. I had to blink away tears myself. It hit me. I was the one who got saved. My life didn't have any purpose, whether in the real world or stuck in this virtual one, until I met her. Nishida looked up at the sky and whispered, "That's so true. So true." He turned to me and said, "Just hearing your story, Asuna, was an incredible experience for me." Here's the rewritten text. "Don't give up on catching that huge fish just because it's tough. I thought to myself, it's not worth quitting on life either. A friend was talking to me and he made his point clear. It's just not worth it." He nodded strongly, then stood up. "I've taken up enough of your time," he said. "You've taught me something important. As long as there are people like you fighting for what's right, we'll make it back to the real world someday." He looked at me with determination. "Keep going no matter what. Give it your all." He shook my hand firmly. "We'll be back on our feet soon. And when we are, you'll come visit us. Right?" I pretended to reel in a big fish, and he nodded enthusiastically, a big smile spreading across his face. Asuna and I high-fived and headed to the teleport gate. We stepped into the swirly heat haze, faced each other, and shouted together, "Teleport Grand M." A bright blue light grew bigger and bigger until it blocked out our friend Nishida, who was still waving goodbye. When we arrived at the Knights of the Blood headquarters in Grand M, we got some shocking news. The whole Reckon team was wiped out. We exclaimed. We were in a cool glass-walled meeting room near the top of a huge iron tower. I had met Heathcliff here before our big duel. Now he sat at the curved table, looking super serious in his robe. His guild officers sat on either side of him, waiting to see what would happen next. Heathcliff's bony fingers were pressed together in front of his face, and his forehead was scrunched up in concern. "We made some progress yesterday," he said. "We finally mapped out the entire 75th floor without getting hurt. But it took a long time." He paused, thinking about what came next. The boss battle was supposed to be tough, and I knew what he meant. We had faced some really tough bosses before, especially on the 25th and 50th floors. Those guys were super powerful and had given us a lot of trouble. On the 25th floor we even lost some of our best fighters to a two-headed giant monster. It was so bad that the army decided to change their strategy and not push forward as much anymore. We were in big trouble on the 50th floor. The boss, a giant metal statue with lots of arms, was attacking us like crazy. Many of our fighters had to teleport to safety, which made our team a lot weaker. Luckily backup arrived just in time. If they had been any later, we would have all been defeated. One guy in front of me was a total hero, keeping our team from falling apart. If every part of the game had bosses as tough as this one, we were in for a world of trouble. Heathcliff kept talking. His voice sounding really calm, we sent out a team of 20 people from 5 different guilds to check things out. He said his eyes, which looked like they were made of brass, were half closed, so I couldn't tell what he was thinking. They were super careful and took every precaution. He added, "Here's what happened when Ten and his friends went into the boss lair. 10 stayed back at the door while the other 10 players ran ahead to the center of the room. Just as they got there and the boss was about to show up, the door slammed shut behind them. The only ones who know what happened next are the 10 players who stayed back with 10. They tried to open the door for 5 whole minutes, but it wouldn't budge. They even tried picking the lock and using brute force, but nothing worked. Finally, after what felt like forever, the door swung open. Heathcliff's face got all scrunched up as he remembered what they saw next. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath before continuing. The room was empty, he said, all 10 players, and the boss had vanished into thin air. There were no signs of teleportation or anything. It was like they never existed. Heathcliff even sent someone to check the Black Iron Palace monument, just to make sure they hadn't somehow ended up there. But as he shook his head, it was clear that they didn't find anything. Whatever happened to those players, and the boss, it remained a total mystery. I felt Asuna's breath catch next to me, and then she let out a whisper. 10 people. How did it come to this? I asked Heathcliff. Was it one of those anti-crystal zones? He nodded, his face serious. That's the only explanation. Asuna told us that the 74th floor had the same problem. From now on, we have to assume all boss lairs will be like this. I let out a frustrated sigh. This was bad news. If we couldn't escape in an emergency, a lot more players would die from accidents. The whole point of beating the game was to save lives. But to do that, we had to defeat the bosses. It was starting to feel like a game where you could really die. It's living up to its game of death reputation, I said, but Heathcliff wasn't giving up. He closed his eyes and spoke in a calm, clear voice. It looks like we won't be able to use crystals or retreat easily in this battle. Things just got a lot tougher. Here's the rewritten text. We need to bring a big team, but not so big that we can't keep everyone in line. I was told. I'm sorry to interrupt your honeymoon, but this is an emergency. I nodded. We're in, but let me make one thing clear. As soon as safety comes first, if things get dicey, I'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe, even if it means putting the rest of the team at risk. Heathcliff cracked a small smile. People who fight to protect something they care about are usually pretty tough. I'm looking forward to seeing what you're made of. He filled me in on the details. We've got 3 hours before we start. Our team has 32 people, including you and Asuna. We'll meet at the gate on the 75th floor. Let's get ready. Here's the rewritten text. As soon as we were dismissed, the paladin and his officers stood up and left the room. Asuna turned to me and asked, "We have 3 hours to kill. What should we do?" She leaned against the long metal table, looking super relaxed. I just stared at her, not saying a word. She looked amazing in her red and white battle gear, with her shiny brown hair and sparkling hazel eyes. She was like a precious gem. I kept staring until Asuna's face started to turn pink. "What's up?" she asked, laughing nervously. I finally spoke up, but I was really hesitant. "Asuna, can I talk to you about something?" "What is it?" she replied. I took a deep breath and said, "I don't want you to fight in this boss battle. Will you stay here instead?" Asuna looked at me with a curious expression. Then her face fell and she gazed down sadly. "Why would you say that?" she asked. I knew I had promised Heathcliff that we'd work together, but I was worried about what might happen in a place where our special crystals wouldn't work. "I'm really scared. The thought of something bad happening to you is freaking me out. So you're just gonna rush into danger and leave me behind where it's safe?" she asked, her voice shaking with anger. Suddenly she jumped up and stormed over to me. Her eyes were blazing like hot coals. "If you don't come back from this, I'll be so heartbroken that I won't want to live anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll hate myself for just standing around doing nothing. If you're gonna take a risk, then let's do it together. If you're in, I'm in too. Kirito." She stopped talking and poked me hard in the chest with her finger, like she was trying to make sure I understood how serious she was. Asuna's face relaxed, and a small smile crept onto her lips. "You know, I think everyone in this battle is pretty scared," she said. "We all wish we could just run away. But there are still a lot of people coming to fight, and I think it's because they believe in you, and the commander, the 2 strongest players in SAO. You're leading the way, and that gives them courage. She looked at me with pleading eyes. I know this isn't easy for you, but I want you to do it for us. Not just for the others. Let's get through this together. So we can log out of this game and meet up again in the real world. As she spoke, she pointed at my chest, and I reached up to gently hold her finger. My heart was racing with fear. I didn't want to lose Asuna. I'm sorry, I said, feeling like a total wimp. My heart is telling me that we should just forget everything and run away together. I looked deep into her eyes. I don't want you to get hurt, and I don't want to die either. Honestly, I don't care about anything else. I took a deep breath and kept going. I don't care if we never wake up from this virtual world. I'd be happy to live with you in that cozy little cottage forever. Just the two of us. Asuna's eyes were closed, and she was holding something tight against her heart, even though it wasn't really there. Her face scrunched up like she was in pain. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I know. It sounds too good to be true, she whispered, her words filled with longing. Wouldn't that be amazing? Here's the rewritten text. We were chatting like we always did, and then she stopped mid-sentence. She bit her lip like she was trying not to say something she didn't really mean. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I could tell she was serious. Kirito, have you ever thought about what's going on with our real bodies? She asked. I was caught off guard. It's a question that pops into every player's mind at some point. But we never really talk about it, since we can't contact the outside world. Worrying about it doesn't do us any good. It's like having a big cloud hanging over us, we just try not to think about it. She seemed to be waiting for me to say something, so I thought back to when this whole virtual game started. Remember how Kadokawa explained the rules? He told us that our special headsets called nerve gear would keep working for 2 hours without power. The reason was, so our bodies could get to a hospital in time, I said, filling in the blank. She nodded, like she was thinking the same thing. Right, and after a few days, we all experienced a weird disconnection that lasted about an hour. I remembered it clearly. It was pretty strange at the time. I stared at the scary warning in front of me, wondering if my brain would be damaged in just 2 hours. I thought back to what had happened to all the players. I think we were all taken to hospitals, I said. It's not like our families could take care of us at home if we were stuck in a coma for years. My friend nodded. You might be right. We were probably moved to real hospitals, and then plugged back into the game. But this thought made me really worried. If my body was just lying in a hospital bed, connected to all sorts of machines, it couldn't last forever. I felt a surge of anxiety. What if my body was getting weaker and weaker by the minute? I squeezed Asuna tight, like our hug could prove we were really alive. No matter if we beat the game or not, I said. We all have a deadline looming over us. Asuna nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. And it's different for each person, she added. Then she dropped a bombshell. You know how it's against the rules to talk about our old lives here? She asked. I nodded. Curious. Well, I've never told anyone this before, but you're different. Kirito. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, in the real world, not just this game. I want us to have a real relationship, get married, and grow old together. Asuna's voice cracked, and she buried her face in my chest. She started sobbing uncontrollably, and I could feel her tears soaking through my shirt. I held her close, trying to comfort her as she let it all out. I gently rubbed Asuna's back as I finished her sentence. So we have to fight now. She was still scared, but she was trying to be brave. I couldn't let fear take over either. I took a deep breath and tried to sound calm. It's okay. It's gonna be okay. If we fight together, we can do this. I squeezed her hand tightly, trying to push away the chill that had crept into my chest. We walked out of the gate in Kalinia, a city on the 75th floor. The square was already packed with strong players who were probably part of our raid team. As soon as they saw us, they stopped talking and stared at us with worried looks. Some of them even gave us a special salute that only our guild uses. I hesitated for a moment, but Asuna quickly returned the salute like it was second nature to her. I watched her, feeling a surge of confidence. Maybe, just maybe, we could get through this after all. Someone poked me in the ribs. Hey Kirito, come on. You're one of the leaders, so say hello to the team. I gave a weird salute. I'd been in lots of boss battles before but never had so many people looking at me. Just then someone clapped me on the back. It was Klein, wearing his usual sword and silly headband. But what really surprised me was the big guy standing next to him. Agil, with his huge axe at the ready. "You're joining us too?" I asked. Agil looked offended. "What's with the surprise?" He said, "I heard this battle was going to be super tough, so I put my business on hold to help out." "Come on. Can't you see I'm being super generous?"
Agil said in a ridiculously over-the-top voice. I playfully patted him on the arm. "I know all about your big sacrifice," I teased. "That's why you didn't want any of the treasure, right?" Agil looked like he was in pain, rubbing his bald head and making a face. "Well, maybe not exactly," he admitted, sounding a bit whiny. Klein and Asuna burst out laughing at Agil's expense. Soon everyone else was chuckling too, and the tension in the group started to fade away. Just then the clock struck 1, and a bunch of new players walked through the gate. Heathcliff was easy to spot. He was wearing his bright red cape and carrying a shield with a crucifix on it. The rest of the Knights of the Blood Cove elite team were right behind him, looking tough and ready for action.
As soon as they showed up, the whole group got tense again. Heathcliff was probably the only one who outranked me and Asuna, but it was hard not to be impressed by how united the guild seemed. They all wore different gear, but their red and white colors stood out, and they just seemed stronger than our army. The leader, a paladin, walked towards us with his 4 friends. Klein and Agil took a step back, like they were intimidated, but Asuna just calmly saluted back. Heathcliff nodded at us, then turned to talk to the whole group. "We're all here, thanks for coming everyone," the leader said with a smile. "I know we all know what's on the line, this battle is going to be tough, but I think we can win it. Let's do this and make today our day of freedom." The whole group cheered and shouted in agreement. Their energy was infectious. The leader's confidence and charm were amazing. Most hardcore gamers are loners who don't like working with others, so it was cool to see one being such a great leader. Maybe it was this virtual world that brought out the best in him. As I watched him, he turned to me and caught my eye. He gave me a small grin. "Hey, Kurito, I need your help today," he said, his voice low and serious. That's when I realized he was talking to me, Heathcliff, the gamer with a surprise talent for leading the team. "Time to put your dual blades to the test," Heathcliff said with a calm voice.
I was surprised. Most people would be freaking out before a big battle, but not him.
He seemed totally chill.
I nodded, and he turned back to our group. "Let's move out," he said. Raising his hand, he pulled out a dark blue crystal from his pouch, and the crowd started buzzing. This wasn't just any ordinary teleport crystal. Heathcliff's crystal was special. It could open a secret door to wherever we wanted to go. Normal crystals only took you to a specific floor, but this one was like a magic portal that let everyone in. The downside: you couldn't just buy one of these crystals at a store. They were super rare, which made Heathcliff's crystal really valuable. He was about to use it to take us right to the enemy's doorstep. I felt a surge of excitement. This was it. We were really doing this.